I awoke around 6 a.m. with a full bladder and a loaded torpedo bay. There was no sleeping throughout it, so I got up, lightened my load. There is a narrow window in my bathroom, just big enough for me to see the sky, not much else. There was the beginning of daylight. It was still too early for me, and my first priority was getting back to bed as soon as possible. The sleepiness came back as soon as I had finished doing my business, and I made my way back to bed. About 2 minutes back into getting settled under the covers, I heard strange noises coming from just outside. My place is just isolated enough that the slightest sound of company gets my attention. You don't just find my home on accident. You have to be looking for it. But the sounds I was hearing didn't put me in the mind of people. At first, it was this grunting that kind of reminded me of a bear. But then there were some snarls and snorting I'd never heard a bear make before. And trust me, I've met my share of bears. There was another sound I'd heard from a bear, some sort of barking noise, as if a stray dog had made its way onto my property. I would have to make sure it wasn't going to be a threat before I would attempt to leave my house. A cursory glance through my window showed me nothing. It was then, when I looked through the living room window, I saw something. But even then, I wasn't ready to accept what my eyes were telling me. My brain's very first reaction was that I was looking at someone that had been living in the wilderness for a very, very long time. Then, I began to process all the little signs that this thing wasn't even remotely human. He, or it, stared at me intently, which should have been impossible. There was no way that it could see me through the window like that. Its stocky frame was solid and muscular, covered in silvery white fur, with what appeared to be a black outline. It had long black ears, standing straight up, seeming to be alert to any sounds. I saw a long snout, and it twitched, as it appeared to keep sampling the air. The final detail my brain let in was the long and lethal nature of the claws. They looked like they were purposely designed for a life of combat. What happened next was the worst possible thing for any man in my situation. My brain questioned whether I left the front door unlocked or not. As soon as I moved to check the front door, this monstrous wolf thing darted towards it. I didn't know how something with those kinds of claws would be able to handle the doorknob, but I wasn't going to give this thing a chance. It was further away from the door than I, but we reached for it at the same time. I fumbled and tumbled the deadbolt into place, not a moment too soon. The knob twisted wildly, but the door held fast. I staggered back, breathing a sigh of relief, and those awful claws made the glass of the door into a spiderweb of cracks. The arm that came through the window was more muscular than it had appeared from far away. It fumbled for the lock. If this was a wild animal, it knew something about doors, and I knew that I had to be disappearing if I wanted to live. I began running deeper into the house, shutting and locking every door behind me. The monster slammed against the first barrier, hard enough to knock picture frames off the walls and shatter against the floor. I desperately reached into my memory for any hint of having something that could make me equal to this clear and present danger in my life. My father had left me his Colt 1911. I had it up in a box in the attic. I went into the room with access to the attic, pulling the staircase down from the ceiling with a rope, but not before shutting and locking the room's door. I heard the first locked door buckle under the strength of the monster. I clambered up into the heat of the attic, and I went straight to the old burrow where the Colt lay inside a box. My heart sank when I saw that it was still disassembled. All those years, and I hadn't bothered to put it together. But seeing the loaded magazine was the kick I needed. So, I cobbled the piece together with shaking hands while standing on a shaking floor. Each time this monster threw itself against a new barrier, the entirety of the house shook. No sooner had I loaded the magazine and chambered around than I saw the black shape of the wolf monster coming up into the attic with me. I had forgotten to retract the stairs, and in the dimness of the attic, I was able to see the gentle light coming out of its eyes. They were this rustic coppery orange, like a wick of a candle. My ears rang from the shots as I unleashed the bullets. The shots that landed on its torso and shoulder just seemed to irritate it. It was the one that penetrated its skull right next to its eye that made it change its mind. I saw some matted fur and blood shower the floor. It howled in pain and fear and rolled down the stairs. I'm guessing through the door where it came in. I stared down at the remnants it left behind. I was pretty sure I would be facing off with this thing again had it decided to come back. I don't know what on earth this was, and I really don't care. I'll do whatever it takes to kill it next time it comes. Yeah, I don't think I'm going to be involving the police. I can't possibly see any reason how they would be of any help. Not in something like this. Really, what would I tell them? A werewolf broke into my house and tried to kill me? Yeah, right. I feel like I'm pretty much on my own with this one. So, maybe if I thought I reached out to cryptid investigators, or people like you, I could see some real answers. I think the world's forgotten just how much wilderness Nevada truly has. Mention Elko, Nevada, and most people go, oh, slot machines. People like me that are actually from around the area know that the casinos of Elko are but a dim campfire in Nevada's vast outdoors. We were actually in the wilderness nearly Elko in July of 2008. It was a camping trip with my family. We were in the mountains between Elko and Wells. We had gotten the hard part of getting our shelter set up and out of the way. All we needed was materials to start a fire. We had propane as a backup, but what's a camping trip without a real fire? I headed deep into the timber to start collecting dry twigs and bigger where I could find them. I thought I'd hit the jackpot when I found a fallen tree that was completely dried out. I was going to go back to our campsite for my hatchet when I heard a bestial and guttural sound coming from all around me. The echoes of the trees made it difficult to pinpoint. It had come up from behind me, behind the fallen tree. It was a gray, furry humanoid creature standing on two legs, wolf-like, and it began circling the tree, walking upright with no problems. That's when I noticed that the legs were naturally bipedal. The knees bent, just like a human's. My first thought was that it was some sort of canine creature, even though the face wasn't exactly dog-like. There was just enough human in it to make me wonder if werewolves are real. The face did have a longer snout, longer than a dog's but shorter than a wolf's, and the eyes were beady and dark red. In the twilight, there was just enough dimness for me to see the redness, and also a slight glow, I feel. I felt like I was confronting some crossroads of the unnatural and unholy. I had babbled the prayers I had memorized as a boy in Catholic college, but the creature didn't seem to be that impressed. Maybe the devil wasn't involved in what I was encountering, but from the looks of those claws and teeth, this thing was more than capable of doing the devil's work. In desperation, I reached into my back pocket, took out a flare and a lighter, and brought the sparkling, hissing red beacon to life. And I waved it in a wide, slow arc. This stole the monster's attention, and part of me wished that I had been a firecracker. I grasped just enough bravery to step forward, making jabs at the creature with a flare. But it started swatting at the light with its gigantic hook-like claws, and my courage shrank back. But something told me that I didn't want to drop that flare. I wasn't sure if the light was disorientating or what, but where the flare went, its eyes went. The flare sputtered unexpectedly, showering this thing with sparks. And after a few furious swipes, I thought I would end up getting shredded alive. But this thing retreated. Anyway, I told my family what was going on and we cut out camping trip short. They don't really believe me to this day, so I'm sharing my story with you. Maybe you and your listeners will believe me. I live in Michigan, in a very rural area. The town I live near is very small and surrounded by lots of woods. On the outskirts of this town are farms that extend for miles and miles, until you find another farm. I've always been interested in cryptids, mainly Bigfoot, Yeti, Icky Man. When I was about 13, my father took me out to his garage so we could go hunting, because he thought he had heard something outside. He was pretty startled by what he saw. At first, I thought we were looking at a homeless man looking for a space to bed down. I wondered why he was wearing such a thick fur coat. But that's when I realized that was its fur, and it was not a man. It stood up from a crouching position, trying to make itself look as big as possible. We had some dog years ago that looked like a burly wolf. This looked like her distant cousin, if dogs could comfortably stand up on their hind legs. The lips pulled back to reveal gums that were almost as long as the teeth. The claws at its side twitched. It was a complete portrait of a living, breathing killing machine. I don't think I'd ever been more scared in my life. I wanted to cry, but I also didn't want to show any weakness in front of my father. My dad spoke to me in a low, shivering voice. He said we needed to back up. We had it cornered in the garage. We didn't want to make it feel threatened. I eyeballed the wood axe directly behind the wolf thing. Even if I could reach it in record time, with the help of the adrenaline, the creature was surely faster. So I nodded in agreement. We slowly backed up with our hands out, trying to look as non-threatening as possible. It seemed to get the message, but it kept its head low and its lips pulled back. It slowly left the garage and began walking around us in a circle. Something told me that it wasn't going to leave the yard. I acted on impulse and ran for the wood axe as soon as I thought I had a chance. I don't think it expected this. I mean, it actually made it over and got the axe in my hands. I knew that I didn't have time to think, so I swung around blindly. The beast's claws were less than 6 inches away from my face when the back of the axe struck it across the skull. It staggered back and did the unexpected. It fled. I looked at my father in disbelief. He gave me the same look. It's one of those stories you want to tell people, and you want people to believe. But people would think I'm nuts, even with my dad corroborating my tale. So I'm sharing it with you, hopefully to get some answers on what this could have been. I've heard of things like the Michigan Dogman, but I'm not all too sure that's exactly what this was.